This is Kirsten Carson. I'm a Senior Marketing Director with the Customer Experience team at Cengage. Thank you guys all for coming today. We've got a big crew. We actually had over 3,000 people register for this, so clearly this is a very well-timed and high-interest topic. With school starting, gosh, so for some people probably is already underway, a lot of you starting in the next 1, 2, 3 weeks. I think everybody's excited to get some new ideas about how do you break the ice and get students talking from that very first day of class. So a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker. As you've seen, like I said, there are a lot of people joining, and thank you everybody for jumping in the chat. If you have questions specifically for our presenter today, for Shawn, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, or any general questions that you have, put them in that Q&A. We will try to get to as many as we can with so many people dialing in. What we're going to do is at the end, whatever questions we haven't gotten to, we're going to roll up for Shawn. Shawn has very kindly volunteered to answer them after this session. And then we're going to put all of that into a PDF and share that back out with you probably next week along with the recording of this session. So again, apologies in advance for any questions we don't get to. We'll see how much time we have at the end. If we can get to a few, we definitely will, but use that Q&A, and that's where we'll keep track of everything. So with that, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Shawn Orr. So Shawn is the director of the Center for Innovation and Teaching Excellence, as well as a professional instructor in the Department of Communication at Ashland University in Ashland, Ohio. She has worked in higher education for over 25 years as a business and gen ed professor, department chairperson, academic advisor, dean of faculty, and director of college success courses. And she's taught more than 20 different courses in the business, management, composition, humanities, and communication areas. Shawn was the 2011 North Central Educators Association Educator of the Year, and she's been actively involved in working with accreditation, assessment, online learning and curriculum design, and redesign in higher education. She's prepared, developed, and delivered over 200 workshops. I think, Shawn, I might have seen over 100 of them, so I think that 200 number is modest.
Probably.
But over 200 workshops, webinars, presentations, training seminars, and keynote addresses across the country, from things from college success, advising, online and hybrid learning, portfolio development, retention strategies, service learning, technology, generational teaching and learning, flipped classroom, apps to engage students, active teaching and learning strategies, experiential learning, and 21st century skill development. And if there's anybody on this webinar that knows when Shawn sleeps, please share that in the chat, because I'm not sure what her secret is. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shawn.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you are choosing to spend an hour with me this afternoon when school is so close to starting again. So I'm so happy that you're going to spend a little bit of time with me. And I've been looking at the chat and seeing where everyone's coming from. I'm seeing some people from Bowling Green State University. That's my alma mater, from countries around the world. So it's just so exciting to see everyone together as we really look at how do we engage our students from the very first moment of class. How do we help them build that sense of community with one another? So I'm super excited to be here. I have been teaching at the college level for over 25 years, which I know is shocking because most of you are probably thinking that I'm like, what, 26 or 27? I'm actually 28. If you wanted to know, I started teaching at college when I was 3. So that's the truth. All right, not really. So what I want to do today is I want to share with you some of my favorite icebreakers. I'm going to go through a lot of icebreakers that have different purposes. Some of them are going to be social. Some of them are going to be topical. How do we introduce new topics in our class? And some of them are going to be just educational. How do we get our students to think in the way we want them to think as we start? And I want to let you know I'm going to cover multiple modalities. So I'm going to talk about icebreakers that you can do in your face-to-face classes. I'm going to talk about icebreakers that you can do in your online classes, in your hybrid or flipped classes. And anything that I share can really be adapted. And hopefully I'll give you some ideas about how I adapt some of these icebreakers in my own classes. But I want to start out and say at the heart of an icebreaker is relevance. It has to be relevant. I'm not talking about the touchy-feely, make your students feel good, though that's certainly important, but we're talking about really relevant ways to engage our students from the very first moment of class. So here are my 3 student learning objectives. I want to start out and talk a little bit about what an icebreaker is, or a topic starter, or whatever you want to call these introductory activities. What purposes do they serve in my classroom? I want to give you 22 different examples, and I saw many of you said on the chat as you were waiting for the webinar to begin, I just really want some fresh new ideas that I can try out in my classroom. I'm going to share a lot. Don't feel overwhelmed. If you walk away with 1 or 2 new ideas and strategies to use, then that really is a win. And as Kirsten mentioned, this will be recorded and you will get a copy of this, so you can feel free to share it with your friends or colleagues, go back and review an icebreaker or get an idea. I know I'll be talking really quick. I'll be sharing a lot of websites you can go to, and I do have a list of all of the sources at the end of this webinar. And then I want to end and look at what are some best strategies for using icebreakers to get the most out of them in your classroom. So whether your goal is to produce new ideas amongst your students, to see new concepts and materials, or to form new connections, hopefully we'll be able to do all of those. So I want us to start out and think about, what do we call icebreakers? Because I think sometimes when we think of icebreakers, we think of those kind of touchy-feely activities that you do on the first day of class to get your students to know each other. And that is a little bit of that is a little part of icebreakers. They do serve this purpose of getting to know each other. And that's important. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Tinto's choice theory research. And Tinto, this is a quote I'm going to use from that book. He says, one of the most important factors in establishing high retention rates at college is the degree to which students establish close and supportive professional relationships with faculty and other significant people in their classroom and on campus. And I think we would all agree with that. Our goal is to have our students persist. When the going gets tough, whether it's curricularly or otherwise, they persist, they hang in there. They feel like they have a support network and a sense of community. And icebreakers help us do that. They help us create that sense of community. So I don't reserve icebreakers just for the first day of class. I think if you asked any of my students, they would tell you I do icebreakers nearly every day throughout the entire semester. Some of them I do online, even in a face-to-face class using our learning management systems. Others I do at the end of class. I often do icebreakers after break to encourage students to get back to class on time because they know something fun's coming up. So whether you're thinking of these kind of as active learning strategies, way to really help our students create the content, or ways to build connection, retention strategies, we're going to talk about all of these. So whatever's in a name for you, whether you call them openings or tension relievers or impact activity, this is what we're talking about when we look at the impact of icebreakers. So let's start out with a definition, and this is from one of my favorite books. I'm going to refer to this several times. This is from the Encyclopedia of Icebreakers. This book is actually from the 1980s. I have 2 copies, and I literally pull it off my shelf 3 or 4 times during a semester to get new ideas. But Forbes Green says icebreakers are tools that enable the group leader, the teacher, to foster interaction amongst students, to stimulate creative thinking, help your students produce new ideas about topics, challenge basic assumptions, and illustrate new concepts. And I think we all think about icebreakers and we think about, how am I going to introduce a brand new idea? And I put a picture of a hammer on here because if you're like me, if I go to get a tool, it's often a hammer. I tap things in with it. I pry things open with it. But if all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, if you just have 1 or 2 icebreakers that you use every single semester, it gets old very quickly, and you don't have the opportunity to make all of these great things happen that we want to happen with icebreakers. So Maslow said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. So if you only have 1 tool, if we only have 1 tool in our arsenal, in our toolbox, we tend to see every problem with our students as a nail. One way to solve it, one way to build connection, one way to introduce new topics. So I hope I'm going to give you a lot of new tools for your toolbox today. One more thing before I jump into the actual strategies is, I think this is some really great research, and we've all heard this consistently as educators. We learn and retain 10% of what we hear, 40% of what we get to discuss together, but we learn and retain 80% of what we experience, of what we practice. It's why we have our students do homework, right? We want them to practice these concepts and make them their own. But we learn 90 to 95% of what we teach each other. So when we are able to take a back seat as an instructor and allow our students to kind of take that leadership role, that active, energy, engaging role, our students are much more likely to learn and retain. Walter in Choice Theory and Glasser in her book, Teach and Grow Rich, Walters is the one that says it's 95%. But I use this analogy all this time with my students. I say, I want you to think of me as a gym teacher. And if I was preparing you to do the presidential physical fitness test, I wouldn't stand in front of you and say, all right, everybody watch me. I'm going to do 25 push-ups right now. Now, everybody watching, okay, this is how I bend my arms. This is how I position my body. And then stand up and say, all right, you feeling more strong? You ready to do it? Oh, you're not? Okay, well, watch me do 25 more. And I think that's the very easy thing to become as an educator, is we've got so much material to cover in such a short period of time, and we do all the push-ups, we do all the work. And then it feels frustrating when our students walk away and they don't feel any stronger. They haven't grasped the material, they haven't made it their own. And these kinds of active learning strategies are so crucial in a classroom because they force the students to do the push-ups. And then what you're doing as the educator is you're the guide on the side. You're supporting, you're encouraging. Bend your arms more when you do push-ups, bend your knees, put your toes underneath you, get your shoulders down, and all of a sudden they're doing the work and the learning becomes their own. And that's at the heart of active learning strategies. And icebreakers help us do this. I'll use one more quote, and this is actually from my daughter's volleyball coach. I just came back from a scrimmage, and he said this to the girls, and it really resonated with me. He said, where there's movement, there's energy, and there's passion. And I think when our students are sitting like passive observers in a classroom waiting for us to impart knowledge on there is no energy, there's not a lot of excitement. When we can get them up and moving, not that all icebreakers are moving, but when we can get our students up and moving, we can get them engaged, we can get them physically, tactilely involved with the material, we create energy and passions for the topics that we're sharing. So let's go ahead and jump into some great icebreakers to use this year in your classes. So there's 3 purposes for icebreakers. We're all very familiar with these social icebreakers. Icebreakers that help our students get to know each other, form a sense of community, become part of a classroom. We also have educational icebreakers, and those are icebreakers that stimulate, that challenge, that get our students, we get them to think in the way we want them to think that day. So whether it's a problem or an issue, or you're going to be doing a lot of creative thinking, you want your students to create a lot of new ideas on a topic, you can use these types of icebreakers to get your students thinking in the way. And then topical are icebreakers that we use to introduce new subjects. So I'm introducing a new concept, a new theory, a new formula. I might use a topical icebreaker. And obviously the goal is that I'm scaffolding learning as they're going throughout the course. So let's go ahead and jump in and look at some social icebreakers. So I'm going to share with you 9 different social icebreakers that I really use often in my class. The first 2 are my hammers. They're the ones that I pull out nearly every single semester. And then the next 7 are ones that I use as I'm continuing throughout the semester to try and build a connection with my students. So these are warm-up activities. They enhance our comfort level. They initiate contact with students between each other. So here's my first one, the Fivefinger Introduction. And just so you know, if you use any of these, if you modify any of these for your classroom, please talk on the chat with your colleagues and share with them how you're using these icebreakers in your own classroom. Because I know I get my best ideas from my colleagues as they share what they're doing. So this is the one I do every single semester. I always draw a hand up on the board, and my students always have a good laugh at what a terrible artist I am. And I think that's a part of the fun of icebreakers, the humor, the laughing, the letting your students know that it's okay to have fun, that learning should be fun. So this is my Fivefinger Introduction. And I always start out and tell my students this is not the one finger introduction that you get when you're driving on the road and you cut somebody off. So what I have them do is I have them pick a partner sitting close to them and introduce themselves using these 5 things. Your pointers, yourself, what's your name and your major, what's a word that would describe you as a student. And then your middle finger, who is somebody that you look up to, somebody you admire, somebody that's helped shape you into the student or the person you are. Your ring finger, who's someone you love. Your little finger, something you need to be a little more or a little less of, so I could be a little more patient, or I could have a little less road rage, or I could be a little less of a procrastinator. and then your something you'd really love to learn or discuss that day in class. Or if you're using this truly as a social icebreaker, you can say, what's something that you love to do? What's a hobby? And then I have the students say these 5 things. Sometimes they're in groups of 2, sometimes in 4. And then I have them introduce their partner to the rest of the class. So the really neat thing about this is that not only do they get to meet one person, but they get to meet everybody. And then here's my twist on this. I also have them say the names of every person that's gone before them. So once again, our name holds a lot of power. It describes to us who we think we are. So as they introduce their person and share these things about them, they have to say the names of everyone before. And it benefits me because by the end of the first day of class, I know the names of every student that's sitting there because I've heard them 20 or 30 or 40 times. I just want to let somebody put on the chat and ask if we're going to be discussing online icebreakers, and we are. For every one of these types, I will absolutely have a couple online icebreakers. So this is great. I've actually done this one online as well and put a picture up and said this is how you're going to introduce yourself to the rest of the class. Somebody asked how much time do they have to think of an answer. Here's the thing. If I have a class that's big, 40 people, and I have an hour, I make them do the pointer, introduce their partner, name, major, and a word that describes them, and then pick one of the other 4 things that were interesting so we can get through the whole class. All right, here's number 2, bingo. I love this. My students love this. It creates a ton of passion, and it gets them up out of their seats. So for those kinesthetic learners, when they're up and moving around and doing something, this is a great learning strategy. I like that. I make these on my free bingo cards. .com if you've ever gone to that website, but you can go on and you can make all the bingo cards you want. I actually did this for a training session that I did, so it was on technology. So I had everybody stand up. People could initial their bingo card, so if they had ever used a podcasting class, if they had ever used a Padlet, an online bulletin board, if they had ever used LinkedIn or Free Rice as a flashcard tool, they could initial, and then the first 5 people to get bingos get a prize. Now, think how you could use this in class. You could put on here vacation destinations, and on the first day of class have your students stand up, and anybody that's ever visited that state or that destination gets to sign, and pretty soon they're talking and saying, oh, you went to Hawaii? You lived in Montana? So did I. You could do activities they did over the summer, who went swimming, who went skiing, who read a good book. You could do things that you've eaten. Or if you wanted to use this as an icebreaker to introduce a topic, for example, let's say I was going to introduce transactional communication, I could put examples of transactional communication and have students sign the bingo card if they've ever done them. But what this does is it forms this kind of sense of community. They're all talking, they're sharing things that make us similar, they're forming a community, but at the same time, they're getting to know each other better or getting to know the content better. So I love bingo cards, use them all the time, and several people are putting sites on the chat right now where you can go to make free bingo cards as well. Like I said, I like my free bingo cards, but there's lots of places you can go. All right, the third social icebreaker. Have you ever, this is on an index card. So you give each of your students an index card and you have them answer this question, have you ever? And they try and think of something maybe that they have done that nobody else has done in the class. Have you ever visited the Grand Canyon? Have you ever gone whitewater rafting? Have you ever jumped out of an airplane? Have you ever eaten sushi? And then you collect all of the cards and you read one, have you ever visited the Grand Canyon? And everyone that's visited the Grand Canyon stands up, and then you ask a couple of people to share what was the neatest thing about the Grand Canyon, what was most surprising to you, what did you see anything else while you were there? And there's always a couple things that that some people have done that no one else has done. So it really draws your class in. Now, here's the way that I've modified this. If I have a larger class, let's say 40 or 45 people, I will just do 10 on the first day, and then every day for the next few weeks, I'll pull out 5 more and do. And people are listening, is when's my card going to come up? When is my have you ever come up? And every time it continues to help your students kind of build that sense of community together. All right, can you hear me better now? All right, here we go. The next one, liar, liar, pants on fire. This is a really neat one to do. So I try and get my students to engage with me. I know if they form a sense of community with me as the instructor, when the going gets tough, when they start having problems, they're going to come to me. So what I do is I have something called an expert of the day. I draw names out of the hat. Whoever's name I draw out, the next class period is my expert of the day. And if it's towards the beginning of the semester, this is one of the activities that I'll do, liar, liar, pants on fire. So whoever my expert of the day is the one that assists me as the instructor. So if I say, what page is that graph on again, John? And he'll go, page 67, Professor Orr, and then I'll tell everyone. Or if I say, I think there's a good article on page, what is that page? Or could you pass out these things? Or I want everyone to do a playing card, they'll hand them out. So they kind of become my teaching assistant for the day. But here's one of the things that I do. All of my students tell 4 things about themselves, 3 things that are true and 1 that's false, and the class tries to guess. So once again, it's kind of that gaming mentality. We're trying to beat somebody else. We're trying to figure out who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth. Here's a way that you can modify this from the content. If you do that kind of expert of the day, you can have them do it in the chapter. So you can have them read the chapter, your helper, and then say, based on the reading, I want you to share 3 things that are true and 1 thing that's false. So they stand up and they say, oh, well, did you know that agenda setting theory says this, 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 and this? And then the students have to say which of those things is not true about agenda setting theory. And I think one of the really neat things about this is that it forces the students to do the push-ups, right? They're the ones that are in the chapter. They're the ones that are reading. They're the ones that are coming up with, if you will, a quiz question, a multiple choice push question for you. And then the rest of the class is trying to see if they can figure out what's not true. So once again, it's a great icebreaker because either it can be social and they can get to know them, or it can be topical. It can actually be about the content in the day as well. All right, teaching an online class. This is for my faculty that are teaching online or teach blended or hybrid classes. So here's one of the social icebreakers I like to do right at the beginning. I ask my students to put a digital image in the discussion board of something that represents themselves or something that represents why they're taking the course. This is actually me and a friend on the beach in Virginia Beach. So I love horses. We lived on a farm. And I talk about my passion for horses and animals, and this is how it's played out in my career. So instead of just having your students get on the discussion board and introduce themselves, you actually have them post a picture. At my school, we have Kaltura, so my students can actually even post a short video in lieu of a picture if they want. And here's something that it helps me do. It helps me know right away what my students' computer skills are in my online class. If they can't figure out how to upload a digital image, if they can't figure out how to post or reply to somebody on the discussion board, I'm catching that right in the very first week so that I can provide the assistance that they need to be successful. So once again, they can't see me all the time, though I certainly do synchronous office hours and other things to help them feel a connection to me. But this is a great way they can say, oh, Professor Orange, she loves horses. So this is a great one if you're teaching an online class. Here is another reason that I use social icebreakers. I get really frustrated walking into class, and today's generation especially report being isolated and anxious. And I walk into class, and have you ever walked in and every single student's doing this? Right? They're scrolling through their phone. They have this whole network of people that they could be talking to, and they're very, very caught up in their technology. And I know this is a gaming generation, and with a gaming generation, they like to win. So I love to use icebreakers to create that kind of sense of competition, even if it's the students forming a community and trying to see if they can figure something out. So I'll do something like this. And if you know the answers to any of these, put them in the chat. So I'll put a puzzle up when my students come to class. And when the students come in and see a puzzle, I say things like, if you can figure all 4 of these out, everyone gets a Valentine's Day pencil. Or if you can figure all of these out before I get to class, and you can't cheat and look on the internet, if you can figure these out before I get to class, you get an extra 5 minutes of break. Okay, so we've got forgive and forget. Good, that's on the bottom right. Hitting below the belt, that's the top left. What about fairy, wolf, duckling? Anybody figure out what that one is? Any ideas? Fairy godmother, good, good. You're very, very close, Judy. So that's supposed to be the good, the bad, and the ugly. right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. How about the 9, all 5? Any ideas? It's supposed to be all in a day's work. So the idea is that when I put these things up, I walk into the classroom, instead of everybody being stuck in their technology, they're all working together, they're talking, they're trying to figure these out. This came from a great book by Scannell called Games Trainers Play, and there are literally 20 pages of these in there. So it takes me 2 minutes to walk into class, to put one of these on the board and say, can you figure this out before I get here? And then they know there's going to be some kind of prize for the class, or something little like, if you can figure all these out, I'm going to add 1 point to the quiz that we're going to be taking when I walk in the door. All right, here's another one. These are additional games. So these are word games, and these are also really great for educational, because it gets students thinking creatively before you come to class. So for example, 26 equals L of the A, and the answer is letters of the alphabet. So 26 equals letters of the alphabet. Let me put a couple of these up. Once again, I have pages and pages of these in the Scannell book that I can pull 2 or 3 of these out, walk in, put them on the board. I can even send these to my students via their MindTap mobile app, so I can send it in a message to them 20 minutes before class and say, I'm really excited to see you in class. See if you can figure this out before you get here. And then they come in already ready to talk to me and ready to talk to each other. Can anyone figure any of these out that I put up here? I went to actually a conference, 76 trombones that led the big parade. Very good. Somebody got number 5. I went to a conference and they put these up, but they didn't give us the answers, and it took me 2 years to figure out number 3. 2 years. And it took me, and I only figured it out when a student walked into my classroom and said, I know that one is because I love board games. Can anyone figure that out? 7 Dwarfs with Snow White. Very good. There's nearly 3,000 pieces. Yes, Steve, you got it. $200 for Passing Go and Monopoly. 2 years that took me to figure that one out. Anyone else? Can anyone get any of the others? I know it's scrolling by really quick. I think somebody might have got number 1. 1 rotten apple in every bunch. So that's number 1. And then maybe somebody got number 2 yet? One apple in every barrel. Very good. So number 2 is supposed to be 5 tires on a car, including the spare in the trunk. So once again, when I put these kind of things, these are very, very, 7 Dwarfs with Snow White. When I put these on the board, this is a very easy social icebreaker. It's not introducing the students necessarily one another. It's not introducing a topic, but what it's doing is getting students prepared for class. They're thinking creatively. They're interacting with one another as they get ready for the day. I also like to do riddles. Riddles are super fun, and once again, I can write it out, or I can send it to them in their MindTap app and say, if you can figure out this riddle before you come to class, as a class, if you have the answers, then we'll do whatever it is that I'm going to do that day. Anybody have the answer? Oh, right away. It looks like Lauren got it. So, of course, this man jumps out of a 20-story building, lands on the concrete, stands up, and walks away. James knew it too. He walked away because he jumped out of the first floor. So once again, when you think about social icebreakers, the goal of social icebreakers are forcing your class to get involved. And if they know there's something to look forward to, your students will get there early. We do a lot of fun, active learning things. I rarely have a student come to my class late. And I know there's extenuating circumstances sometimes. But what happens is when the students come in late, they feel like they've missed out on something because they know we've done something fun. I, of course, always get there early as well, so the students know I'm going to be there early. And, and I play with them. So when they're trying to figure it out and they can't come up with $200 for Pass and Go and Monopoly, I'm rubbing my hands together and going, you're never going to beat me. I got you this time. And they so want to. They so want to win. Somebody ask a question about international students, and I think that's a really excellent point. We have a lot of international students as well at Ashland, and sometimes because slang and words and culture are very different, they don't always get involved. I can tell you I've actually talk to my international students and have them give me some ideas of things that I could do to get them involved. Somebody mentioned cultural bingo. Sometimes I'll ask questions about the countries that my students come in, because that gives them a leg up with the other students, and they can say, I know the answer to this one, and all of the sudden they're involved. All right, so those are 9 just social icebreaker activities to get your students involved, to get them talking to each other, and to get them as part of teams. All right, let's talk about educational icebreakers. I'm going to share 4 educational icebreakers. And when we talk about educational icebreakers, what we're talking about is setting the tone for the class for the day, helping get the conversation going, getting people on their feet, encouraging people to think differently than what they may already, the way they may already be thinking, shifting the focus of study. If you will, priming the students. And I like to use these after breaks, but also if I'm doing something really specific. So it's like Brian has seen my slides because he just said, I like candy bars. So let me tell you one of my first ones. I love doing this on the very first day of class. I give students candy. Now, here's what I do. I like to use those Hershey miniature bars, and it used to be they were wrapped in silver wrapping paper, and then the paper on the outside said what kind of candy bar it is, and they've changed it, and they're not that way, so it's not as easy as it used to. But let me give you an idea of what I do. I take candy bars, those little mini ones, and I switch the wrapping paper around. I don't use anything with nuts. That's just a good idea. But I switch the candy around. So the special dark becomes the Kit Kat, and I switch them around. And then I hand them out, and I tell the students, don't eat any of these candy yet. I'm going to tell you when you can eat them. So they get their candy bars, and I say, okay, and I'm going through the syllabi. And then I say, okay, let's take a quick break. Everyone have your little snack I gave you. And then when somebody opens up the special dark, and somebody opens up the crackle, and it's a Kit Kat, and all of a sudden they're confused. And I say, what's happening? Why are all these candy bars mixed up? And then what I do is I tie that into the lesson about perceptions. Do students perceive that something's going to happen and have a different perception than faculty do about maybe things that are on the syllabus, like attendance or a missing class or page limits for papers or getting to class on time? And we talk about perceptions. Sometimes we perceive one thing is true because we've had one student or one teacher that did it this way, and they have to understand what my policies and rules are, and I have to understand who they are as students. So it's really a lot of fun. I've also done it with just one student. If I have one student, maybe somebody that I know, I'll get a full-size candy bar, and then I'll give it to them as a prize, and then of course all the other students are laughing when it's something totally different than what they thought it was going to be. But the idea is this is a great way. It's not about the content. It doesn't really form a sense of community, so it's not a social icebreaker, but it helps students think in a different way than they thought before. Here's one that I use when I hand back so they can't trust the labels. That's another way to see it. Okay, here's another way. I use this when I pass back exams for the first time. So on the chat board, as you look at this screen, tell me what you see. Could you describe it in as much detail as possible? And I ask the students to do the same thing. I say, pull out a piece of paper, and I want you to describe what I put up on the board in as much detail as possible. Go ahead and put some of your answers on the chat board. What do you see on the screen in front of you right now? Okay, a dot in the corner, good. A square dot in a white box. A large white screen. Ooh, very good. Abstract art, a black dot. Okay. So I ask the students, what is it that you see? And they do very much what many of you are doing, although I'm seeing a lot of things that I would hope to get to in my students. They focus on that black dot in the bottom right corner, right? That's what they see. It's what's different. And then I say, how many of you noticed the big screen, the white space? All of that with nothing on it, because that's the majority. The white dot was just a little teeny piece of what was up there. Why didn't you describe the white space? And then, a polar bear in a storm. Good one, Colette. So here's the thing. What I do is I tell the students, when you get an exam back, you start to immediately focus on what you got wrong, what you didn't know. I missed this question. I thought this was right. Oh my word, I got a C and I thought I should have earned a B. And they start to focus on all the things that didn't go right, but they forget to focus on the whole big picture. oh my word, I got a 79% on this. I understand. I have mastered 79% of the content already on this exam. Good for me. We tend to focus on the little things and miss the big picture. So I prime them as they're getting ready to get their exam back with this icebreaker, and I say, you have to focus on the whole big picture. Celebrate what you learned. Celebrate what you got right. Celebrate that thing that you studied and was on the test, and you can say, I got that. And then let's focus on where we still need to go to develop ourselves as learners. So that's an example of what I mean by an educational icebreaker. You're helping your students think in a specific way. Here's another one of my very favorites. I was at a conference, and it was the 32nd annual conference on the first year experience, and I had an opportunity to see Christine Harrington, who's an author, present, and she had us do this, and this has become one of my favorite icebreakers. So this is what she does. She starts class, or maybe even after a break. I like to use it after a break, and she tells her students, 2 minutes, no notes, go. And they have to talk to the person sitting beside them or the people at their table about what they've learned thus far. Okay, what have we learned thus far? The definition of an icebreaker. There's 3 types of icebreaker. We went through 9 educational icebreakers. The one that really stood out in my mind was the Fivefinger Introduction. And they talk about everything that they think they know. Then it's 2 minutes with your notes. Then the table pull out their notes and they try and refresh their memory and say, what is it that we didn't focus on or didn't talk about that we've learned in the first half of this class, or that we learned last week? And then you do 2 minutes as a class, and you say, 2 minutes as a class, together, go. All right, class, how many types of icebreakers are there? And somebody in the class yells out 3. And then I say, give me 2 examples of educational icebreakers. And what was the name of the person that says students will learn and retain 90% of what they teach others? And somebody yells out William Glasser. So what you're doing is you're priming your students to think about the content. So what do I remember without help? What do I remember with help? And then what does the teacher say are the most important concepts? So really, this is a really neat one to bring your students back. All right, one more, teaching an online class. Love to use quotes, and I use these in my face-to-face class, but these are especially effective, I think, in online classes where you're not sitting as much one-on-one and discussing things. You can use very active discussion boards, but in an asynchronous fashion. So what I do is I choose quotes, and I ask students to do usually one of the following. Comment on this, reflect, agree or disagree, and explain why. Find a quote that's similar or contradictory to the quote that I gave you. Provide an example from your life that supports or rejects what this quote says. And what I try and do is pick quotes that are going to get the students to think the way I want them to think as they're going into the topic. So for example, here's one of my favorites from John Dewey. If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday, we rob them of tomorrow. So I want you to reflect on that and post something in the discussion board as you think. Do you think that's true? If we teach today's students exactly the same as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. Now, let me preface this by saying, of course, this was part of his book his second book that was published in 1887. So he had this idea in 1887 about we can't always do the same things just because it's the way that we've done them. So when I post something like this on the discussion board, I get my students to start to think. I actually had a group of international graduate students, and it's very different culturally and technology-wise. What they have at their disposal was very different. So we really kind of primed the pump, if you will. Think of what we've done in the past and what we might be able to do in the future. And I would say, I think students are still students. They want to know somebody cares about them. They want to be challenged and motivated. They want to be engaged in their learning. They want to feel a sense of connection. But they certainly are much more technologically savvy, and that's what every bit of the research says. I just read this article that said 98% of college students have phones, and of those, 90% are smartphones. A more powerful piece of technology in their hand than they had when I graduated from college. So can we teach them the same way? So this is a great kind of topical icebreaker to get students thinking the way you want them to think. Once again, think of putting this on the board as students walk in and ask them to discuss it and be prepared as a table to respond to this, or putting it online and have your students discuss it. You can even separate them into small groups based on the way they think or believe about quotes like this. All right, so those are some educational icebreakers. Now I want to do topical. Topical icebreakers are those icebreakers that help our students think about the subject of the class. So whatever subject you're going to be introducing. They help connect groups. They introduce new experiences for problem solving. They introduce new concepts or ideas. So as we walk into a class and we say, today I'm going to be studying topic X, these are the types of icebreakers that get our students thinking about that specific concept or that specific topic. And once again, I'm going to share 8 different topical icebreakers and then end with a concluding one. Okay, so prepare to have your mind blown. This is one of my favorite ones. So HP Reveal. How many of you use augmented reality in your class right now? So if you're already using augmented reality, just put a yes in there. I would be curious to see how many of us are using augmented reality in our class. Okay, so this used to be called Erasmus. This is completely free, and this really has changed the way that I do my teaching. So what this is it's augmented reality. If you will, look at the picture up at the top, HP Reveal Studio. It's pictures that come to life, AKA Harry Potter. So when a student sees a picture, they hold their phone over that picture, and you come to life talking to the student about the topic. So I was going to show a video, but because we have such a short amount of time, I just did some pictures. So you can see the student is doing her work. All of a sudden, she needs some just-in-time instruction or wants to be introduced to that chapter. She holds her phone over the picture, and then that's me. I come to life out of the picture and start talking about that topic. This is a picture of my syllabi over on the left-hand side. My syllabi is covered with pictures. So it happened to be spring break, and I told my students, I'm going skiing over spring break, but if you want to get a head start on the paper, hold your phone over, and you can hear about the paper. And then I talk to them and say, this is what the paper is, this is what we're going to be doing. So cool, so easy to use. And then, and you can use this once again as a way to introduce a topic or a concept. You could create one of these for every week of your syllabi, and your students watch that. Sometimes you can give them, like I've done this before with a quiz, where I'll give them a hint to the quiz, and they have to watch the little video, and then when they watch it, of course, they're getting introduced to the topic, and then at the end, there's a quiz hint that comes on. Now, somebody said, how long does it take to prep this? That is an excellent question. I'm going to show you how you do it, and then I'm going to say of everything that I'm sharing, this probably takes the most time, but it's not ridiculous. This is what you do. You go in and you take a picture. Use black and white. I take pictures all over my house. And here's the thing. Once you link a video to a picture, you can only use that on one syllabi. You can't go and use it on multiple, because if you do, it's not going to, the same video is going to come up. So I go all around my house and I take pictures, and I take pictures of me. And then you record a short video. I record them all with my camera because they're easy to upload. So I record a short video of me talking about a concept, telling a joke, introducing something, and then you go to this HP Reveal Studio, you upload the photo, you upload the video, you link them together, bada boom, done. And then any place that you print that picture out, students can hold their phone over it and it comes to life. I have to tell you, I actually found this at Disney. So I went to Disney with my girls, and we were waiting in line, and yes, HP Reveal is free. We were waiting in line, and they had this purple triangle, so I held my phone up over it, and they actually showed the ride in motion, so you could decide if you wanted to wait in line and ride the ride. And I have to tell you, if you go onto this site and look at what they're doing in education as they recruit students, it's really amazing. This takes a little bit of time. So this is one of those things that you have to say, I'm going to give a whole day, I'm going to add 3 pictures to my syllabi that are going to introduce topics or give students additional information. Let me give you one more quick thing. I actually had a student that had never seen augmented reality before, and he was going to a job fair, and he said, Professor Orr, listen to what I did. I made business cards and I put my picture on the front of them, and when I handed them out, I showed the recruiters how they could hold their phone over, and then it was me coming to life and telling them about my skills, what I would bring to their company. And then you can also upload Word documents, so he had the Word document right there, so his resume was right there. So let me tell you a couple quick things that I learned through trial and error. Use black and white pictures. If you use color pictures, you have to print your syllabi in color. And then your students download the app. I have them do it the first day of class, but they have to follow you. So it's kind of like Snapchat or Instagram. They have to go on, they have to follow you, and then they can see all of your auras. If they don't follow you, you have to have the paid account, which, you know, I don't want to do that. So I just have my students follow me, and then any place I have auras, whether I put them up on a bulletin board because we're going to have a public relations Student Society of America meeting, they can hold their phone up and they can see things described. Pretty cool. This does take a little bit of time, and I'll be glad to put some additional instructions when I answer all of the questions. Okay, here's a second great educational icebreaker. I hate it when my students say at the end of the semester, I didn't get enough benefit out of the resources that we were required to purchase for this course. So I make it a real effort to use the resources in the class as often as I can. So this is what I do. I use Questia. Now, I don't know if you're using any Cengage products, but if you are, Questia comes free in your Mind tab. It's this little red circle with the eye on it. And what it is it's a search engine really it's a library. So anytime students want to find articles on a topic, to write a paper, do a speech, or what have you, they can go right into their course and use Questia. So if I'm going to introduce a topic, like let's say the topic I'm introducing that day is agenda setting theory, and I start out and say, all right, we're going to talk today about agenda setting theory, and this is the idea that mass media organizations determine what the general population is going to consider as important or newsworthy based on how much attention they give it in a news feed or in the 30 minutes or in the magazine. So I introduce that, and then I have them go in teams, and I love using groups and teams because not everybody has a computer, not everybody has their phone with them that they can jump into their app, not everybody is comfortable with technology. So I go in, and yes, you could use ProQuest or Gale, you could use any of these. This is just the search engine that I use because it comes with their book and I want them to get in it. So for example, you can see if I went into Questia on the bottom left-hand side and I have them put in agenda setting theory, and you can see they get 288 articles or books that have to do with that theory. I make them choose an academic journal because I want them to get into the discipline. And then I have them choose, so they go in, there's 320 to choose from. So in teams, I have them pick one article that has something to do with agenda setting theory. I give them 10 minutes, they review the article. If you do the overview, it's a one-page overview of the article. And then we go around the room and somebody says, well, I chose this newspaper example, and this actually was from a Chinese newspaper, and they were talking about da-da-da. And then the next person says, oh, well, mine was really about consumerism and how it influences what we buy. So all of a sudden, they're doing the push-ups. They're learning about the theory and how wide it can be applied before I even have to stand up and say, this isn't just a communication or a social scientific theory. This can be applied in marketing and business and whatever your major is. All of a sudden, they're doing the push-ups. And then we get into the content. All right, so that's Questia. Here's another one. Love using the resources, once again, that come with my text. In one of my management classes, they had all these case studies. And, you know, we always have students do case studies, right? We want them to move up Bloom's taxonomy and apply some of the things that they're learning. So I love to start out the class with a case study, and these happen to be digital ones. So students love this. This is a you make the decision. So it gives you a case, and then you make a decision. You listen to a little video, and then based on how you decide, it gives you a different scenario. So this class had to do with leadership styles. And I said, you know, today I'm going to be a totally participatory democratic leader, and we're going to vote on every decision. So I do this case study, and then they're having this crisis, and instead of being autocratic or saying this is the thing, we're participatory in every decision, and in 4 moves we bankrupted the company. And of course the students are howling, ah ha ha, Professor Orr bankrupted our whole company in 4 moves. But all of a sudden I've introduced the topic. They're thinking about leadership styles and how how different leadership styles are relevant in each case, and then we get into the content. We did this icebreaker. It introduced the topic. They got to be part of it, and I also got them into the resources that they were using. The other side is you can have them do these in small groups and teams at their table, and then see which company made the most profit, or whatever the case study might be. All right. Plickers, here's another one. Several people have already mentioned on the chat polling. Love polling. I use polleverywhere.com, which is a free polling website all the time in my classes. But I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but I use phones a lot. But sometimes when students pull out of their phone, all of a sudden they get lost in the technology, or somebody snapped them, or they have a message, and sometimes they get a little bit lost. So I really like Plickers. If you've ever used Plickers, go ahead and you can share your experiences in the chat with some of your colleagues. But this is what Plickers are. They're free paper clickers. So you go on the Plickers website, you print out these paper clickers, and then you ask students questions, and they hold up their paper clicker. One side you can't see, but one side says A, another one says B, C, and D, and they hold up. So if you say, if you think agenda setting theory is this, hold up A. If you think it's B, and then they hold it up, then you take, as your instructor, your phone, and you scan the room, and the results show up on the board. So the students are participating, but they're not lost in their technology. All they have is a piece of paper. You're the one that has Plickers. They work great, and you can take attendance that way. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do with these. I've done these with a group as large as 200, and it will pick up about 190 with one quick scan of the room. So once again, you can introduce a really cool topic. You can ask them a question. You can pose a problem, and they have an opportunity to answer. Because here's the reality. When you're in week 7, if a student still doesn't know what side of a T-cell, a debit or a credit goes on, they're not going to say that. But there's no way for them to scaffold the learning. So when you ask questions like that to start out a class, if you think it goes on a debit goes on the right side of a T-cell, choose A. If you think it goes on the left side, choose B. And right now, I've got some formative assessment to know if we're ready to move on, or if we need to stop and cover that concept in more depth. So you can use phones. Polleverywhere.com is great. You can use Plickers, and you can certainly take advantage of what they already have on their phones. So, for example, if you're using a Cengage product, every one of your students has the Cengage, the MindTap mobile app. And I'll tell you, pretend I really am not 28, which is how old I am, but pretend I'm older than that. I have trouble reading on those little teeny screens, but boy, do my students love it. Right on their screen, and of course they can change the font size and make it bigger. But if you're using a Cengage book, they actually get their book right on their phone. They can use Post-it note comments, type them in right on their phone and put it in. I can shoot out announcements to them, and our students are used to announcements coming to them versus them having to go out and seek it. They're used to those push notifications coming to them. So I can send one little announcement, and if they have the MindTap mobile app and they've turned it on, it's their choice. They can get all of my messages. I can send them those little questions or icebreakers before class, or remind them to bring their textbook or whatever it is. And a brand new feature that's just starting is they now have a polling feature on that MindTap mobile app. So if the student is using just the electronic version of the book on their phone, they can poll right there from their MindTap mobile app, which is just, it really makes it a lot easier. Okay. Couple more, and I know we're getting close to time, so I want to get through a couple more. Candy always works well. We all know the one where you get M&Ms and you pick out, and if you have many yellows, you have to tell something about yourself. But think about using this as an educational or a topical one. For every M&M that you chose, you have to say one thing that you learned from the chapter, from the reading that you did before you came to class. So think of ways to change these up to make them your own in a way that you can get your students engaged and involved. All right, here's another one of my favorite ones. This is treasure hunting definition. So here is what I do. When my students come into the classroom, I have them pick a card. And on half the card, I have a term, and on the other half of the card, I have a definition. And they have to go, so for example, operational planning, and that is the day-to-day operations of an organization. They have to find their match to their card, so either they have the term or the definition. And then they have to sit together. Once again, I'm doing collaboration. And you can either have every person go around the room and give an example, or one of the ways that I like to use it is I wait until I get to that place in the chapter that I'm lecturing, and I go, who has operational planning? And the two people stand up, and I say, what's the definition? And then can you give me an example of something an operational manager would do? Oh, they would create schedules. And then maybe the next one is strategic planning. What's an example of something as strategic? They would create the budget. So all of a sudden they're involved and they're waiting for their term to come up. This is a great example of a way to get involved. All right, just the last one before I jump into something I'm going to have you do real quick, and this is Reflections Icebreaker. So, you know, at the end of the class period, I want to know, how much did my students know? Were they able to stay with me? So I ask a lot of these at the end. At the end, I give them note cards, and I ask them something. What was the most interesting thing that you learned today, and what's a concept that you still don't understand? That clearest and muddiest point, if you will. You could say, answer this question, I was surprised about, or I wish you would have talked more about, or this really got me thinking about. And sometimes I'll do this right before a break, and then we come back after the break. I'll scan through those real quick and say, all right, 7 of you are still confused about what should go on a title page in your portfolio. Let's revisit that. Or I turn it back around and I wait until the next class period, and that's the icebreaker that I start out with. So I did some formative assessment. I still have a chance to make a change in the way that I'm teaching, and so here's something we need to go back and revisit, or gosh, every single one of you really had this great, or somebody used this great example. So this is an example of a reflections icebreaker. Whew, that was 22 icebreakers in 50 minutes. So we looked at 9 social icebreaker, 4 topical or 4 educational icebreakers, and 8 topical icebreakers. Let me give you some quick tips for using icebreakers, regardless if it's to create a social environment, if it's to introduce a new topic, or to get your students thinking. Here's a couple quick tips. First of all, and once again, you can see several of you have asked about this encyclopedia of icebreakers. This is the information. You will get a copy of the presentation with all of the sources that I have referenced. But here's some of the things that they suggest that I've really taken to heart. First of all, understand your audience. Not everybody's comfortable touching. There are cultural differences. So I'm always very aware of being thoughtful of people's space, not doing things where they have to touch each other, looking at the makeup of the group. Relax. Feel free to change the rules, improvise. If something doesn't work, change it however you want. Get involved. When I do that 5-finger icebreaker, I'm the very first one to do the 5 fingers, to tell something that I'm passionate about, something I need to be a little more of, something that I love to do. So get involved, be part of the group. Let them know that you want to get to know them just as much as they want to get to know you in the content. I love humor. Somebody mentioned humor is different in different cultures, and I think that's very important to remember. But I certainly laugh with my students and let them know I am so passionate about these topics, and I hope you're going to walk away with that same kind of passion. And then, of course, consider the emotional space. Those kinds of icebreakers, I know you've all been on one where somebody says, everybody tell a deep, dark secret from your past, and you're sitting there going, what? I'm not going to tell them that. Or tell a time you weren't successful as a student, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's really, I really don't want to share that. So, you know, really consider that some people aren't as comfortable sharing. It's another reason that I love using polling, because those students that maybe aren't as comfortable sharing get an opportunity to have their voice be heard. And then finally, I think the most important part about icebreakers is to remember to debrief. So if you were reading a great book and you got to the last chapter and it was ripped out and you never knew what happened with the protagonist, your heart would probably be broken, right? And I think sometimes that's what we do with icebreakers. We introduce it, we do this great icebreaker, and then we forget to help the students write the last chapter of the book. I did this icebreaker because we did this activity because now that you've all come up with articles about agenda setting theory, let's talk about that and what that means. So help your students write that last chapter of the book, know what it means. We want to be a compass for our students, not a map. Right? We don't want to tell them every single thing that they need to know, because the world's changing so quickly. What they're studying for today is likely to be very different than the job that they have in the future. So we want to be a compass and direct our students, not tell them exactly maybe what it is that they need to think. Okay, so I'm going to tell you one last quick story, but while I'm doing this, I want you to do a closing icebreaker. This is called chunking, one of my favorites again. And this is actually my son and I, just a couple weeks ago, we were on a little trip. We went to that void, that augmented reality where you get to be in Star Wars. His idea, but it was still fun. But this is what I want you to do. I want you to think of a word that starts with the first letter of your name that captures what you learned today. So my name is Shawn, so I might say I learned something about being sincere when you do icebreakers and making sure that they are relevant and not just fun. Or I might use my last name. Oh, that might be harder to do. But I think pick something with your first name and give us one word that that describes you. And I just want to close with this. So Andy Rooney says that he had this great quote, and he was talking about when people die that they'll be lucky to have 2 people that remembered that they ever even lived 10 years after their death. As important and valuable as your contributions to the world are, except for teachers who will have thousands of people that they've changed their lives forever. Like, what a privilege it is to get to be a teacher. Whether I'm a teacher at an Ivy League school or a big D1 4-year school or a community college or a technical institute, man, what a privilege it is to get to shape students and their lives and their children's lives. So I hope you learned some great ideas today. To really engage your students, to make them excited about the content, to introduce new topics. And I hope that you'll take just 1 or 2 of these ideas away with you as you look at what can we continue to do to engage our students. Here is a great list of sources. This is where all of the resources that I took came from. Several people were asking about that, engaging the online learner, activities and resources for creative instruction, and many of the ideas came from the Encyclopedia of Icebreakers. So thanks so much for your kind attention. I think we have just, I think we're just right out of time, but I hope you've left me some questions and I'll be glad to go through and answer. And if there's anything I can answer real quick, I'm glad to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Kirsten.
Okay, great. Well, a lot of the questions were actually about some of the sources that you just showed. So, and the related question is, will people be able to get a copy of this presentation or recording after the fact? So yes, we will make a copy of this presentation that you can grab in our follow-up email along with the recording. And like we mentioned earlier, I know there are some questions that we haven't gotten to because we're right at time. So we're going to roll those up for Shawn and send them her way. She's going to answer those, and then all of that will be pulled together for you. And we're actually going to be hosting it here. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is the Cengage Higher Education Faculty Community. This is a website where you can go in, engage in dialogue with peers, share ideas, ask questions, share activities that you're doing. And so under this Engage Your Student section that you see on the left, that's where we're going to be posting all of this material. However, be on the lookout for an email from us. Probably toward the end of next week, it'll have a link to exactly where within this online community you can find the recording, you can find a copy of the slides that Shawn shared today with all those resources you're looking for, and any answers to any questions that we did not have a chance to get to. It's 2 after the hour. I know people have to hop off. Just a huge thank you to Shawn. There's been some really wonderful feedback and some great ideas shared in the chat. So thanks to all of you as well for your creativity and sharing ideas. And we look forward to being in touch probably toward the end of next week. And good luck, everybody, this fall. I hope you have a wonderful semester ahead.
Thanks, everyone. A pleasure to get to spend an hour with you and have a fantastic fall semester.